Okay, I think we can start. First of all, thank you very much for coming. I'm absolutely delighted to be here in person and amongst fellow identity aficionados and professionals. If you went to Alan Foster's session yesterday about introduction to identity, he said you can always find a guy here where you can buy him a beer and he'll talk about identity all day. I'll do that for free. So I need to keep myself accountable for the time, so I'll just run with the session. I'll try to make sure that we have some time left for questions at the end. And you know, if you want to reach out after that, take my business card, connect after the session or after the event, just come over and give you all the details. Today, we're going to be talking about immature maturity models for the next 20 minutes or so. You know, what's related to assessing maturity in your organization. My name is Marcin Zimny. I'm a sales engineer for ForgeRock, and I come from mainly customer background, so worked in security for the last 20 years, in identity for the last few. But identity rocks my boat, and I absolutely love it. So again, delighted to be here. First of all, I want to look at what capability maturity model is. And it's not about, you know, getting scientific explanation, scientifically correct explanation of what maturity is, just getting a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling about what it means for us. And this is the Wikipedia's definition. It's somewhat relevant, but I'd like to highlight 3 words: formality, process, and optimization. So the more mature we are, the more structured we are, the more we know what we do. But I always go back to my kids' days when I looked up to my parents, and I trusted their decisions because I knew they were adults, I knew they were mature, and I knew that they were doing the right things for me. Or so I thought at the time, but that's another story. So similarly in maturity, in identity, assessing maturity is a similar thing. Do we know what we're doing, and is it the right thing to do? So linear models, what does that mean? You go to any vendor's website, and they ask you 5, 10, 15 questions. Hopefully not 5, because you can't really deduce anything from 5 questions. But they ask you those 15 questions. And at the end of it, you get presented with this timeline. And it's usually in stages. So whereabouts you are on that timeline. Most of the time, it's 4 stages. And I call them uncool, cool, Samuel L. Jackson cool, and identity cloud cool. So I have a statement to make. Having identity in your cloud makes you cool. Not having identity in cloud does not make you uncool if you can't have it there. If you look at Denmark, in Denmark, if your systems are processing information critical for the state, it has to be hosted, infrastructure has to be hosted on the Danish soil. So your AWS is not an offer. You can't do it. So why should you be punished by that? If you look at those models, you will also notice that they're very control-orientated. So we talk about MFA, we talk about passwordless. Sometimes we'll talk about identity governance and lifecycle, but mostly it's controls. And we have to realize that identity's maturity is not just identity and controls. It's everything around. So if a vendor introduces an offering, a new offering, they usually will put that at the end of the road. And you know, I've done an experiment, because I'm a weird guy, and I'm usually awkward. There's always one in the room, it's usually me. Pat can testify to that. But I've done an experiment. I took 3 of my former customers, 1 global pharmaceutical company, 1 internet service provider, and 1 financial services company. And I ran that model, and trust me, they were up there with identity. If we had identity like they had, we would be living in a better world. All 3 scored 0. This model was from a Gartner's leader, and it doesn't matter which one it was. They all scored 0. That wasn't the end of my awkwardness. I took another financial services company, which grew over the years, not just organically, but also through mergers and acquisitions. And every time they did that, they would finish the merge on a business level, but not on a technical level. That led to having 8 different IAM stacks, some of them proprietary homegrown, some of them off the shelf, wired together, hardly ever working, having retention problems with customers, and they scored 4. So they were the identity cool. They scored 4 because they had everything. Having everything is not a great thing either. So I've realized that as much as it's important what we do, it's also important how we do that. So let's look at, I've created this kind of overlay of the models. It makes little sense to you now, but let me just explain. So I took 4 different models from 4 different identity vendors, and I overlaid them. And I want to highlight 3 things. If you look at basing and fragmenting, this is the uncool stage. Team is small. Now, here's my problem. There are some managed service providers in this room. I can see my friends. There are businesses that outsource their identity. They focus on what they are. They outsource their identity. They communicate with their identity staff using business language. This is what I need. You go and do it for me. Their teams are very small. They're very mature. So the size of the team is not the size of the dog, but the size of the fight in the dog, right? Secondly, if you look at the second stage, this is the cool stage. It says automated on the top. But another vendor says automate and orchestrate is the identity cloud cool thing to do. To me, that's a massive discrepancy. And the biggest problem as an architect I have when we say authenticate users when appropriate at the highest level of maturity. If you ask me to introduce identity to business and their technology, one of the first reasons why I do that is to authenticate users when appropriate. I might not achieve that fully in an MVP, but that should be way earlier down the line. So, let's look at typical assessment questions. Where do you host your directory, on-prem or cloud? On-prem, uncool. In cloud, thumbs up. Where do you have your SSO? On-prem, thumbs down. In cloud, thumbs up. And you can see that there's only one question there that actually asks about process. So how do you provision users, whether through governance tool, lifecycle tool, or manually? So I was thinking, how do we actually assess the maturity? And I realized that the sad fact about identity is that it's just another application. I love it. It's at the heart of security, at the heart of the business. It's merely a tool to do this. And the previous speaker said, what business speaks, what was it? Right. Language of business is money, right? So we deploy identity to make money. If I go to my CISO and say, hey, I need to deploy this biometric authentication, it's so cool, I can press the finger, or I can look at it, I can blink twice, and the CISO will say, come back next year. If I go to the CISO and say, hey, we've got a real problem with trust with users, and we need to deploy MFA biometrically, and that will reduce the migration of customers to our increase retention, and that's going to save us $2 million, the CISO is going to say, well, come on it. So I looked at what the identity is. It's just like any other application, and I brought it down to 5 pillars. I call them 4 plus 1, and I'll tell you why in a minute. The customer experience is the plus 1. So definition is how we govern the identity of the organization. So do we define what a credential is? And I know it sounds ridiculous, but let's look at privileged access management. If I asked you, give me a name of a fruit, most people will say banana or apple. So if I ask you, tell me what a privileged credential is, most people will say domain controller admins, of course. Local account admins, yes, of course. So here's the situation. There's a business. The security team runs workforce and privileged access, but the product team, the business, runs the IAM, the customer side. They buy a new SaaS offering where they have administrators. Those administrators were not on the list what a PAM is. They deploy the application. And now you're in a situation where you have people that, with single click almost, can stop the front door to revenue-generating systems. And just because you haven't defined it, and you didn't give it to the product owner, a questionnaire, to realize that this needs to be onboarded. The same goes for defining what a customer account is, because you have use cases, and we've heard this on this conference, that you might have workforce, so your employees being at the same time with customers. And the life cycle is challenging in that case. Recognition is how we sustain the good posture. So security is a living and breathing big beast, and it changes. The landscape changes. We need to regularly update it. What you deploy today as a state-of-the-art identity stack is not going to be the same in 10 years. And I know we all say that. We all know we have to do that, but how often do we do risk assessments on identity governance, for example? Do we actually run that exercise every year? And not just on paper, but meaningfully. Then the process. The process means I can have great customer identity access management, of course in cloud. I'm super cool. But if I don't have a good process to onboard the applications, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have a product team that are developing an application. They have specific business goals. They want to get it out to production as soon as possible for one reason, and one reason only: to make money, to make revenue, to grow business. If my onboarding process to my SIAM is difficult, they're just going to do it their own way. They'll silo it. They'll write MVP. They'll do it themselves. It will sneak under the radar, I promise you. So process is important. And then controls. I'm not going to spend any time on that one because that's what we know. All those maturity models, those linear ones mentioned, do you have MFA, do you have SSL, do you have directory? That's important, but only one part of maturity. And then the customer experience, and that's what makes me really sad. None of those models, not single one of them, mentioned customer experience. So everything looks good on paper. We are in cloud, and we provide bad, for the lack of better word, experience to our customers. And customer experience +1 is because when we have the questionnaire, we now have to ask two parties. We have to ask stakeholders, hey guys, what do you do for your customers? Do you do those things for your customers? And then we have to ask the customers, how do you feel about what the stakeholders are doing for you? And our customers, and by customers we mean external customers for customer IAM, we mean our workforce, we mean our PAM or IGA. Whoever is the consumer of the platform is our customer. And actually, they know more than you might think. So the omnidirectional model comes back with this spider chart, where we can see here that we are fairly good with definition. We are very good at recognition. Our process is lacking. We have some controls. It could be a bit better, but it's not the end of the world. And then our customer experience, in my eyes, is really low. A good friend of mine asked me, is there a dependency between them? And I think there is. If I now go to look at the questions from the questionnaire, from the portion that talks about process, I look at those things. What am I missing in the business? I identify them. I bundle them together, and I find a way to fix them. I can even assign a $sign to it. And if I start pulling it in, chances are that thing is going to go that way. So I can, if I don't have a good leadership in my SIAM platform, I don't have a good documentation, and no one owns it, all I have to do is bring the owner, align his objectives to the business objectives, and that guy will sort that out. And again, I can put a $1 value on it. And I can see what's going to happen and what impact it's going to have on my maturity. So what are the principles of good assessment? You can go to PwC, pay 50, 100 grand for the assessment, but I encourage you to do it yourself. You have the right audience. If you run an RFP and want to get a new solution, you talk to various stakeholders within the business, they ask their questions, you bundle them together, you send it out. Now, do the same. Get the architects, get the operation guys, get your CTO, get your CISO, ask the questions, you'll know what to do. Ask the right questions. So agnostic questions are great, not vendor related, not technology related, and use smart answers model. I will show you what a smart answers model is when we looked at example questions. And then the third is prioritize. The outcome model forecast is what I mentioned. Like, we can look at the portions where we lack, where we are on call. We can identify them, and then run a paper exercise to see, okay, if we spend 50 grand on this, this is how our maturity is going to look like in 6 months' time. And the language of business is money, Well done. I can't unhear it now, but it really is what it is. So what we're really interested in the assessment is business. Do I have executive sponsorship? If you don't, your identity will not run well, right? You'll be struggling. It's not impossible, but it's not likely to succeed. Development, do I learn from my mistakes? Agile methodology, do I do my retrospective? Do I prevent reoccurrence? Do I have an incident response? And we all think that we do those things, but we don't. Security, do I use appropriate controls? That we know. Governance, do I have a clear definition of identity? Architecture, do I know where I'm going? Do I have as, is, and to be states? That's not even enough. Do I have dates for the to be states? Because dreams not written down with dates are, sorry, goals that are not written down with dates are dreams. And the customers, they're on the receiving end. Do they like the experience that I'm presenting? So let's look at some example questions in definition. And this is the smart answers model. There's a document that clearly defines what a privileged credential is, for example, or a SIAM credential. 2 points if you do, you're cool. 0 points if you don't, you're uncool. But maybe I have a documentation that requires improvement, and that's my gray area 1. Also, if you look, some of them are 1 point, some of them 2 points. So identity data retention policy is defined. It's 2 points. It's important because you may be fined because it's regulated. But having assistant to be is a good thing to have, but you don't have to have that. In recognition, we can see all those things. For example, and this goes back to, I've been to the presentation yesterday. I can't remember the name of the presenter, Ian Glazer. Ian said that when you deploy MFA, it doesn't matter what you deploy if you don't have a coverage. Right? So I may have state-of-the-art privileged access management solution, and 10% coverage is just a little bit better than not having it at all. Then let's look at the process. This is something that we are fairly familiar with. So do I have a clear onboarding process to go to SIAM? If the secure way is the easiest way, trust me, we will follow that. If it's difficult, people will be trying to, this is our nature, right? We will cut corners. And I'm a fan of cutting proper corners. If I'm cutting a corner, I might do it properly, right? That's just the nature of the beast. Controls, self-explanatory. Do you have MFA? Do you encrypt? Do you do this? Do you do that? That's part of it. That's an important part. And then customer experience. Are you honest with your customers? Do you tell them about your scheduled and unscheduled outages, or do you hide that? How do you communicate breaches in a clear way? So the breach itself, it's not great. But I always say that being hacked is okay. Advanced persistent threat, not knowing about that you're being hacked, that's bad. And if you try to hide it from customers, your trust will suffer. So these are the customer experience, not just if the GUI is nice and it's easy to operate. There's far more than that. And like I said before, we have to ask the questions on both sides of the fence. So the stakeholders, what they do for their customers, and the customers, how they feel about that. So the forecast, the outcome model forecast. If I identify those things, and if you want a real-life example, I was doing a maturity assessment of a PAM platform some time ago, and those guys came and said, tell us what else we can do with the platform, what else we can buy, what else we can spend money on. And to their surprise, they weren't very mature, but not because of the controls. They had all the controls they had to have. What they were missing is ownership of the platform. So we identified those issues, and we said, hey, if you create a PAM team and a business champion and an owner of that, all those things are going to be sorted. So if you do that, this is how it's going to look like. And again, you're putting a dollar value against that. And you can prioritize based on business objectives to get the best of book value. Any questions? I can't believe that I've done it in 20 minutes. Any questions? Okay, if there's no questions, I'll give you 5 minutes of your lives back for a break. Thank you very much for coming again.